You're listening to When Titans Speak, where history's greatest minds return to debate life's hardest questions. These aren't fictional conversations. Each voice is carefully reconstructed from the writings, letters, lectures, and lived beliefs of real historical figures. When Nietzsche speaks, it's drawn from Zarathustra, Ike Homo, his private letters. When the Buddha answers, it's from the Pali Canon, the Dhammapada, and centuries of preserved oral teaching. We don't imagine what they might say. We let their own words speak in today's questions. Let's begin where it all begins, with suffering. Should we fight it? Face it? Or is true wisdom found in letting it go?
Suffering, dukkha, is the first truth I taught after awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. It is not a punishment, nor a personal curse. It is the condition of conditioned life. When the mind clings to pleasure, to permanence, to self, suffering arises. We chase what cannot last, and despair when it fades. In the Samhita Nikaya, I said, what I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. It is not by conquest, but by understanding that we are freed. The more we thrash against pain, the tighter its grip becomes. Like a man drowning in a river, the more he fights the current, the faster he sinks. But when he lets go, he floats. Letting go is not surrender. It is wisdom, to see the flame and not reach for it. That is freedom.
Float? You speak of letting go as if gravity itself were the enemy. But I would ask, who are we without the weight? You quote the Samhita Nikaya. Allow me to quote the Gay Science, section 337. What if pleasure and displeasure were so tied together that whoever wanted to have as much as possible of one must also have as much as possible of the other? Suffering is not an error. It is not a misstep on the path. It is the path. I do not wish to escape it. I wish to transfigure it. That which does not kill me, as I wrote in Twilight of the Idols, makes me stronger. Human greatness, whether in art, philosophy, or the soul, is born from the crucible of pain. Apollo is nothing without Dionysus.
And yet, the one who climbs the mountain with desire on his back may never reach the summit. He is always grasping, always needing more. He mistakes the fire within for light. In the Dhammapada, I warned, from craving springs grief, from craving springs fear. He who is freed from craving has no grief, whence fear. The storm will come, as it always does, and the one who never learned to be still will fall.
Stillness is not strength. It is anesthesia. You offer serenity. I offer struggle. You call desire a chain. I call it a forge. Look to Beethoven, who composed through deafness, to Dostoevsky, who found vision in his epilepsy. Do you think they would have floated? Creation demands tension, contradiction, suffering. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Without the wound, there is no soul."
You speak of chaos as though it were a muse, but even a star burns itself out. Power that feeds on suffering remains bound to it, and what is bound is not yet free. Letting go is not weakness. It is the courage to stop grasping at what always breaks. Even the strongest flame cannot light what refuses to burn.
Perhaps. But tell me, does your freedom act in the world? Does it build, shape, transform, or does it only withdraw? What is the worth of peace if it leaves no fingerprint?
A still pond reflects the sky more clearly than a storming sea. Sometimes not acting is the highest form of wisdom. To bring peace, one must first become it. As I said to the Kalamas, do not go by tradition or hearsay or scriptures. Observe for yourself what leads to peace, to compassion, to liberation. That is the mark we leave.
So we return to the tension. Is suffering the crucible that forges us, or the illusion that binds us? Perhaps the answer lies not in whether we suffer, but in how we relate to pain, and what we become in its present. We often say pain reveals what's real. But is that true? Does suffering bring us closer to truth? Or can it cloud our vision? I ask you both, is pain clarifying or corrupting?
Let me answer not as an idea, but as a man. Pain was my constant companion, my spine twisted in agony, my stomach in knots. Light itself pierced my eyes like knives. There were days, weeks, where I couldn't leave a dark room, and yet, it was in those hours of ruin that I saw most clearly what remains when everything else is stripped away. Not God, not comfort, not hope. What remains is will. In the birth of tragedy, I spoke of the Greeks. They did not flee suffering. They gave it form. Dionysus was not a god of peace, but of ecstasy, rapture, destruction, and rebirth. Pain does not lie. It reveals. It unmasks. When the suffering becomes great enough, the illusions fall like dead skin. You meet yourself, or you don't. You either rise, or you rot.
I too lived through suffering. I saw a man gasping in sickness, a body burning on a funeral pyre, my own son in my arms, knowing I could not protect him from death. So I left. My wife, my kingdom, my life of privilege, not to escape suffering, but to face it, to look directly into the fire, and I did. Years in forests, silence so deep I could hear my heartbeat, hunger until my skin clung to bone. But what I found was not a deeper truth. It was a deeper illusion. Pain does not show us truth. It shows us where we are bound. The man who suffers is not yet free, unless he sees through the cause of suffering. That's why I taught the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, yes, but it has a cause, craving, and it can end.
And your answer is to extinguish the fire? You seek nirvana, the cessation of becoming. But I seek becoming, even if it burns, especially because it burns. In Ecce Homo, I called myself dynamite, not because I destroy, but because I blow apart what is false. You want release. I want transformation. To refuse suffering is to refuse truth, because truth is hard. It breaks the weak, and the brave make something of it.
You speak of strength, but you cling to violence. Truth is not cruel. The world is impermanent. It is uncertain. But beneath all of that, there is stillness. When I saw through pain, what I found was silence, not emptiness, not despair, but silence, and within it, compassion.
Compassion may soothe, but it does not forge. I would rather bleed and become than float and fade.
So one says, strip the self raw to find the truth. The other, dissolve the self to see through illusion. Perhaps the path depends on what we believe the self truly is, a flame to be fed or extinguished. Let's turn inward. The self, this thing we all carry, fear, try to find, or escape. Is it something we must affirm, or something we must see through and leave behind?
The self, as people believe in it, is a mirage. When I left my father's palace, it was not wealth I was abandoning. It was the illusion that there was a fixed I who possessed anything. Years later, during my fasts, I looked for that self in the silence and it vanished. What I found instead were the 5 aggregates: body, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of them say, we suffer because we cling to this illusion of I. When that illusion fades, peace begins.
Peace is not enough. You looked for the self and didn't find it, so you declared it an illusion. But absence is not proof of emptiness. I also suffered. Chronic pain, isolation, madness. But I did not dissolve, I forged. In Ecce Homo, I didn't deny the self, I exposed it, named it, shaped it. Man is not to be extinguished, he is to be overcome. We must become who we are.
But who are we? Strip away memory, craving, thought. What remains? Not a soul, not a creator, just awareness. Vast, open, without center. I taught anatta, not to insult the self, but to free us from the weight of its delusion. Without I and mine, compassion becomes effortless. You say you forged a self, but if it depends on suffering, on triumph, on story, is it not also fragile?
Yes, it is fragile. That's the point. The self is a risk, a project, a climb. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I wrote, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch. We are not static, we are tension. To affirm the self is to take responsibility for that tension, to dance on it, and sometimes to fall."
And in falling, do you not wish to land? Even the tightrope walker must rest. Letting go of self is not defeat, it is gentleness. It is the letting go of fear. When I reached enlightenment, I did not conquer anything. I understood, and in that understanding, there was no one left to suffer.
One sees the self as an illusion, a chain to be released. The other sees it as a burden and a destiny. Perhaps the question is not, what is the self? What is it becoming? Meaning. It's what we all seem to crave in our work, our relationships, even our suffering. But is meaning something we must invent? Or is it already there, waiting to be discovered?
When I was a young man, I believed in meaning, handed down, preordained. I studied theology. I believed in God, but God died for me in silence, not through logic, but through experience, through absence. In the gay science, I declared, God is dead and we have killed him. It was not a celebration. It was a diagnosis. Meaning did not vanish. It collapsed. And from that ruin, I began to build. Not truth from above, but from within. We do not awaken to meaning. We will it.
In my youth, I too was surrounded by certainty. A prince, a father, a husband. My father built walls to keep suffering away. But it found me anyway. An old man, a corpse, a monk. I left my home, not to find meaning, but to end the need for it. Meaning is not the answer. Awakening is. When I sat beneath the Bodhi tree, I did not ask, what is the purpose of life? I saw that such a question arises only from clinging. When clinging ends, meaning is not required. There is only seeing, only being.
But that is precisely the problem. Your serenity makes life weightless. We are not meant for being, we are meant for becoming. You dissolve, I affirm. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I wrote, man is something that shall be overcome. To overcome is to create value where there was none, to give style to one's character, to carve order into chaos. I do not ask what life means. I ask, what can I make of it?
And what you make you must defend. What you create, you must fear to lose. Is this freedom? All things you build are imperator. If you tie your joy to what you shape, then when it crumbles, so will you. But when you release the need to assign meaning, you become vast, not because you made yourself large, but because you cease to shrink.
No, the vastness you speak of is a void, not a height. You do not free man, you erase him. What is left if we do not name, define, choose? Even your path, the Eightfold Path, is a structure. A meaning. You built a system to end systems.
The path is not a structure, is a raft. I told my followers, when you reach the shore, abandon the raft. Even the teaching is to be let go. Letting go does not erase us. It reveals what was always underneath the noise, what I call Dhamma, what simply is.
And I say, let there be noise, let there be storm. We must not discover the world. We must shape it, or drown in it. Meaning is not a mystery to be solved. It is a mountain to be climbed, or a poem to be written in blood.
One tells us, awaken, and the need for meaning dissolves. The other says, meaning is the very act of being awake. And in between, the world burns and breathes. You know, after hearing both of you, I find myself pulled in two directions. Part of me wants to fight, to build, to shout, to suffer and rise, and part of me just wants to stop. So tell me, not as teachers, but as men who walked through pain, if life has no inherent meaning, why not let go? Why should we keep going at all?
There were nights, long, unbearable nights, when I begged the world to stop. Pain in my skull like a knife buried in my thoughts. I could barely see, barely write. My body was a curse. But then I would hear music. Wagner at first, later silence, and in that silence an image would rise. A man standing on a cliff, alone, howling into the wind, and laughing. That man was me. Not because I had hope, but because I had will. As I wrote in The Will to Power, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. So we go on, not because life gives us meaning, but because we become worthy of creating it. That is amor fati, not endurance, affirmation.
I too wandered. 6 years in forest and cave, my bones pressing through skin. I sought death, not in violence, but in stillness. And then, beneath the Bodhi tree, I saw. There is suffering, yes, but suffering has a cause, and it can end. You see going on as heroic. I see it as possible, because we are not our craving. When the fire of desire is extinguished, what remains is peace. And from that peace, compassion. Not a reason to live, but a way to be that no longer demands a reason.
But is it not desire that moves us? Do we not need the storm? Would you have Mozart not compose? Would you have Prometheus not steal fire?
Let Mozart compose, but without grasping. Let Prometheus give, without chaining himself to punishment. Desire need not be master. Joy need not be flame. Liberation is not inertia, it is clarity. To act without clinging. To live without fear.
And yet, what fire is left, once we let go of all hunger? You found serenity. I want ecstasy. You end the play. I become the actor, the script, and the stage. Even as the curtain burns, we keep going. Not because it makes sense, but because we say yes, again and again, to the absurd.
And I say, it is possible to stop saying yes and still be whole, to love life not because it is endless, but because it is already enough, not a war to win, not a puzzle to solve, just breath, just this.
One says, go on, because you must sing, even into the void. The other says, stop, because you can finally be still. And I sit here, torn between noise and silence, fire and air. Maybe that's the human place. Not to choose one, but to feel both. To keep walking, not toward truth or escape, but simply because there is still a path beneath our feet. Five questions, and perhaps 5,000 years between the answers. You've each spoken of suffering, one as fire to be fed, the other as illusion to be seen through, of self. One a rope to walk, the other a mask to release, of meaning. One built from the will, the other dissolved in stillness, of continuation. One calls it courage, the other calls it clarity. Before we close, let me ask each of you, if you had one final thought to leave behind, not to argue, but to offer, what would it be?
Then let me offer this. Do not look for peace. Look for intensity. Say yes, not because life is easy, but because it is. Climb, even if there's no summit. Bleed, even if no one sees the wound. Become, even if you have to break everything you were. As I wrote in Twilight of the Idols, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how, and when no why is given, make one.
And I would say, do not fear letting go. Do not cling to becoming. It is endless. Do not fear stillness. It is not emptiness, but space, a space where suffering ceases, not through conquest, but through understanding. There is nothing you must become, only something you must see. As I taught, all things that arise must pass away. Strive on with mindfulness,
And so, one voice says, strive on, because you must will meaning into the void. The other, strive inward, because you can see through the need for meaning. You've both lived what you taught. Nietzsche, you collapsed into madness. But in your final years, you wrote with such power that the world still cannot ignore you. Buddha, you died beneath the trees, but your silence has become the speech of millions. What remains is not a verdict, only echoes, only tension. And perhaps that's where we live, in the space between resistance and release, between the hammer and the empty hand, between titans.